everybody. Welcome to an extra special edition of MSP Business School today. Rob and I have decided to do a little fireside chat for you today. For those watching on YouTube, we're sitting cozily in front of our fires. For those of you that are listening on our podcast networks, hey, imagine a fireplace. But anyway, we got an interesting topic to talk about. This is one Rob and I have talked about off the air quite a bit.
Yeah.
What happens when your buyer is a liar, right?
And how do you know? And how do you know?
That's the most important part, right?
Yeah.
So what we're really going to focus in today is a little bit about, the process of identifying whether or not your buyer's a liar and when it's time to kick that person out of your life. So with that, maybe Rob, you want to kick this one off a little bit and talk a little bit about the buyer is a liar syndrome.
Brian, here's the thing. Reps have a really difficult time of walking away. Right? It's one of the hardest skills we learn, right? And you don't learn it until a lot later in your career when you're more interested in closing deals and making money and less interested in trying to make the boss happy with a beautiful sales funnel for a couple of months, right? And one of the things that I learned, and this was a difficult thing for me as well. I hate losing. I really, really hate losing. And being able to walk away from a deal for a long time in my career meant that I lost, right? And it took me a long time to realize that I really won with that, by being able to walk away and knowing that I could go spend my time with somebody who, really wanted my product and understood the value. Yeah. So for me, what I'd like to talk about here today is knowing how to recognize some of the signs of somebody who's, playing you, right? Yeah. And giving reps the courage to push back and engage a prospect and say, hey, what's really going on here? And do we have time to do some business here, or is this not the right time? Which is an okay question to ask, but it scares the heck out of reps. Right? That's a very difficult question to learn. And I'm sure you've seen it many times in your career, Brian.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, I felt the exact same way, right? When I was younger in my career, you had many masters that you had to answer to, right? The pipeline was definitely one master. Another one was your own wallet, of course. But more importantly, it was that feeling of when do you let go? And I struggled with that, right? And the reason I struggled with that is honestly, I wasn't reading the people. I was reading what I perceived the need to be. That was the first piece, right?
Yeah.
So, hey, I know you need this, so I'm not going to let go. But if the person on the other side's not receiving it that way, at some point you got to say to yourself, am I ever going to change the condition that sits before me? And if I can't, to your point, move on, right?
Yeah.
But it does come with age. When I say age, I'm not meaning an age category, but age in your seat, time doing it, enough repetition to see those indicators and getting out in front of them. And maybe that's what we should start with, Rob, before we go into how to solve the problem. What are some of the indicators that you personally have seen? And then I'll share some of the ones that I've seen that start letting me question, is this guy for real? Or is this, buyer where we want them to be?
So the number one thing that I have always seen that as soon as I hear this, I start questioning is when I'm going through a presentation and they're agreeing with everything that I'm doing and want to get directly to the price, right? And just everything is fantastic. Everything I'm saying is great. They want to get to the price and they have no real pushback. Like if you do a sales call and you're done with the sales call a lot faster than you're typically done with a sales call, and they were enthusiastic about the entire thing, easy in is easy out is what I've always found to be. And if you start getting ghosted right after that, you messed it up, right? If you can't engage them to the normal time that you think the meeting should be going to, then something's wrong. Their agreement is not real agreement.
And I love what you just said there because, I agree with that whole concept. If they're agreeing with you, it's not a positive sign. Yeah. It's never been and it took me a while to realize that in life, but it's not a positive sign because the truth is with conflict comes answers, right? And what we want to see is a little bit of, well, tell me more about that. If they're not engaging you and asking you questions and asking you to clarify why what is what is, the reality is you're not doing, they're not that interested in you. I use it as a buying signal now today when I'm doing demos. If I see somebody and I have, I've done this demo enough that I know where my pause points for asking, hey, do you have any questions, or my engagement points are to make sure that I'm not losing that listener. if I'm just keep hearing, no, we have no questions yet, I actually accelerate my sales process so I can get off the demo call, because you've already told me you're really not interested in what I have
Yeah,
to
you
say.
know what, Brian, that's probably one of the number one things right there. If you say, when you know that they should have a question and they don't have a question, you've got all your red flags should be going up,
Yeah.
right? And you need to figure out a way to get them back in because they're out, they're disengaged for some reason. It doesn't make them a liar, right? I mean, like, we say that, but what it makes is completely disengaged, right? They are not
Yeah.
interested in what you're talking about.
And you're spot on. Disengage is different than a liar. I think we will bring up some points of where the buyer is a liar later,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think disengagement's a different thing. But yet sales reps do not read that signal, can waste a lot of time
Yeah.
chasing that ghost and really losing potential other opportunity in the process.
Yeah.
I think you've seen it. The biggest thing with a salesperson is that lead means everything to them. They work so hard to get in the door of that customer, right? We've talked about it in previous podcasts. The magic doesn't even happen until at least after the fourth touch.
Right.
And more traditionally, it probably is closer to the 12th touch before you really get that high level action. So, when you think about the effort you've put into this, and now you got, an hour and it got done in 40 minutes, you refuse to believe sometimes. Hey, man, I'm not in this deal. I'm not in it to win it on this one. You're more like, I can convince them I can do this. Right. So I don't know what you might coach to on those kind of situations.
So are we talking about where we're in a lying situation or disengagement?
No, I was staying on the disengagement. We'll come into kind of those lying situations.
So if I see them, and here's a trick. One of the tricks that salespeople do is they start nodding their heads, right? Yeah. When they're looking for tacit agreement, they start nodding their heads.
Right,
I can't remember what smarty pants invented that. But if you've got them nodding their heads and they're agreeing with everything that you're saying, and you know that there should be a question at this point, you need to stop, take a second, and then understand why they are not asking the questions that they have. And you need to draw out that question if you need to. Give me an example, Brian, and I'm not saying for you to give me an example, but you get through everything and they say, no, we don't have any questions. And you say, well, I kind of have a question here. Can you give me an example how the issue that we were discussing has impacted the goals of your business this quarter? And then boom, you've drawn them out and you've got them to, really talk about it. And then you're having them speak and trying to uncover the onion, right? So that would be the number one thing I would do.
And you've really hit upon a tactic that I think also kind of comes with maturity, sales maturity and time too. It's knowing not to ask the yes, no question and to force them into engagement. Because if you can't get them to engage, the other thing you're missing out on is those reinforcers, in my opinion, when they start ghosting you or when they're not being communicative, because what you're really extracting from them is the pain points, right? That's the only way you get to the pain points is by asking that. And those pain points, I've seen sales reps go in with me and they go, so what are your pain points, Rob? Tell me what you're experiencing today. If I'm selling my customer something or I'm introducing a concept to my customer that he never really thought about, he doesn't have a pain point.
Right.
But if I know what the pain points are, can I lead them through questions to get those pain points there and use them as leverage points later when we're having further discussions?
I totally agree. One of the things that I always tell my reps, and this is, I was taught this back when I was younger. You go into a prospect, you're sitting across from, and you say, "What keeps you up at night?" And they say, "Well, too much caffeine in the evening." Right. So you can't say, Mr. Prospect, what's keeping you up at night? You really have to say, you have to dig into, what is holding you guys back from meeting your goals in the operations department. You ask them that and boom, now all of a sudden, okay, now we're getting into somewhere. What keeps you up at night? It's just so general that they're going to get lost too. You've got to drill it down into one specific thing that is going to be an issue in that industry.
And that, it's amazing. Again, you got to get in, the concept of it's about them. So you got to get them talking about themselves and their problems. And you can't do that with a yes, no question. And you certainly can't do that with the head nodding, which you are spot on, man. I don't remember who said that's the way to get them going. The more you get them to shake their head, the more they're in agreement with you. Yeah. That might be okay in a retail format where the purchase isn't high ticket, high value. But certainly just because I get somebody nodding their heads, they're not going to sign my 5K contract. Month contract.
I wish that was the way you could do it, Brian.
Well,
that would be fantastic.
Instead of these fireplaces behind us, we'd have the Maseratis and the mansion pictures, right? If it was
the planes,
easy.
the Gulf Streams back there. Yeah, it'd be great. Different world. The distraction thing or the disengagement thing is a little bit different than, understanding this person's just outright lying to me. Like they're actively they're actively disingenuous. They're not saying, and that tends to come when you ask the question, what are you guys doing here? And they say, the worst one I've ever heard, Brian, was, we need to have 3 proposals in order to make our decision. And you
were beating me to where I wanted to go.
It's the worst. I mean, you crumble at that point. You're like, oh, it's going to be a waste of my hour here. Yeah. I like, you've seen that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was just about to say, one of the biggest buyer liar scenarios that I've fallen into is when you're being exercised for a quote to really negotiate against their competitors, which is really the same as the 3 quote concept, but you can let's split those out. Really, when I think about the 3 quote concept, it's more around hey, I got to do my due diligence, but I really don't care which one of you wins, or I don't want to get too emotional about this, or I already know I want to stay with my vendor. And then you're into the scenario I'm talking about. Hey, I just need to get some pricing so I can tell my vendor where they need to be and I can better do it. Or more importantly, where I get annoyed with that is forget about the 3 quote or RFP or any of those formats. When a customer starts exercising you to drop your price under the pretense of, if you can get me to here, I'm going to move forward. But truthfully, they're going to get you when they get you there. Sometimes it's so they can go to the other vendor that they're dealing with or their incumbent and say, hey, I've shaken these guys down to this.
Yeah.
You need to beat this or I'm going to make a move. And then that's just being totally exercised. And that's where I feel the buyer's being a liar, because they're making verbal contracts and commitments with me that they have no intention of keeping. They're doing it to get there. But I may get lucky. Maybe the other vendor won't get there and then they'll throw it over to me. And, that's,
but then you have that person as a client.
You do.
And that's
and then you got to wonder how many other times they're breaking that rule with you in that relationship. Right.
Exactly. So then you're stuck with that client. One of the things, and I don't mind if a person says, hey, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. I need 3 quotes. And we have an incumbent, but we need 3 quotes. I don't mind if they tell me that, as long as I can get in front of the decision maker, not the influencers, but the decision makers. If I can get all the people in the room, I'll go through the process with them because I believe that I have a better ability to demonstrate my value than other people. But that's my line in the sand. If they say, well, we can't get you in front of the decision maker, we can only get you in front of these people over here, then I say, well, we're just not going to be able to demonstrate the value that we can, provide if we don't have all the people in the room, and we cut bait. Is that what you guys do, or how do you guys do it?
I want you to hold that thought about the decision maker, because we should come back to that also before we wrap up this conversation today. But I agree with you. Obviously I've got a number of competitors in the space I'm in. I always did as an MSP as well. Yep. And, when I was pure play MSP on that side. And what I always found was, and this gets into ferreting out the liar and really trying to understand where you're at. Hey, we all ask, who's your incumbent person today? And if they tell you that they're working with an MSP, well, why are you considering to make a change? And they might tell you why they're considering to make a change. But what we don't usually ask is, who else am I up against? And even if they can't name them by name, what do you like about who's you're up against? I know that when somebody comes to me and tells me that they're in the evaluation process on a QBR tool today, I know who they're probably talking to. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'll even take the step at that stage and say, look, here's the lane we fit in. If that's not your particular cup of tea, let's call it a day right now, right? And again, most young salespeople won't do that, but I'm trying to work the customer to understand why I don't fit as much as I am going to fit. And then I'm going to try to hold them true to the reasons why he fits, or he or she says,
that's nice. I like that
process. Right. Because again, I'm not trying to exclude myself from the deal, but I do know that there's a certain profile of client that excels in my MSP, in my platform, whatever I've ever done. I know where my tribe sits in that. And if you tell me that you're looking for something that's out of bounds on my tribe, it's exactly what you've said before. Now you got that client. Well, now I got that person who's that square peg in my round hole, and I'm not really going to be able to satisfy them, and that relationship is going to be challenging and eventually disintegrate anyway, right? And again, if your master isn't just your pipeline, because pipeline to me means nothing. I've seen plenty of multi-million-dollar pipelines that have yielded $200,000. And I've seen guys that when they show me a pipeline, they're at the stage they're so confident in it, they end up closing 60 to 70% of what's in there because they just don't tell me about the fluff they're still negotiating. And as sales managers, and this is what I think a lot of sales reps don't understand, we don't care. We care about the production, and we care about our perception of what your close rate is, because that's how we coach you too, right? If your close rate is 30% because you're filling it up with all kinds of junk, or 20% or 10%, it just tells me he's got to have a lot of junk out there to get there. But how much of that junk is stale before I even see it? Where that person that refines their sales pipeline is right there. So I'm using my end user, the buyer, to try to litmus test, is this guy for real? Is this opportunity for real? And is it in an area that I can win? Because if I know that I'm really going to be stretching the truth, and I don't mean the truth of my product, but the stretching the truth of where we can get things to meet in the middle, to make this work, I might as well just bail, because nobody's going to win in the long run. So that's my take.
I think that the two main things that you have to consider when you're investigating a prospect is this a review process, or is this a pain? Is this an issue process, right? Are they talking to you right now? And this needs to be a question. Are we talking because, an issue happened that is causing you to leap, right? Pain, or is this a review process? If this is a review process, you need to have some red flags, and you need to ask some kind of tough questions during the Q&A part, because if it's a review process, they have somebody in place. You're in there for, you don't know what reason you're in there for. It could be negotiating, like you said earlier, negotiating trip. But if it's an issue-based conversation, you're in the driver's seat with something with high value and high ability, right? You have a less chance of them ghosting you, less chance of them, not seeing the value proposition, and much less chance of them trying to just straight up lying to have you there.
So we got 5 minutes left, Rob, that we can chat today. Let's talk a little bit about the decision makers themselves, right? So we've talked about some of the things we experience, some of the challenges we get, some of it's self-imposed, some of it's on the buyer, but let's talk about when that decision maker is truly lying to you. And I'm going to reflect back on what you said earlier. When somebody tells me that we can't get access to the decision maker, it's a lie.
It's a lie.
Sorry, that is to me a bold-faced lie, because if with what we sell, again, I'm an MSP coming to you with a potentially a 60 grand or more contract. Tell me what decision maker doesn't want to at least have some level of input there. So we now know we're at the gatekeeper. But let me share my thought, or share your thoughts, please, on how you feel about the roadblock to the decision maker, and then what the decision maker expectation should be for the sales rep. What are we to expect there?
I'm okay at the influencer level if I am in an issue-based conversation, right? So if I'm talking with the IT director, and they're really the champion, and they're the ones that control everything, and the decision maker is just a check writer, I'm okay there. Right. And I don't mind being there. I try and get the decision maker, but it's not an all or nothing for me. But if I'm in a review process, if I don't get to the decision maker, I don't bother my sales engineer with building a quote. I just don't. You don't have enough meat on the bone to demonstrate your value. You just become a product and a commodity at that point, at best. Right. And you've just wasted your sales engineer's precious time and your precious time. So if I don't get to the decision maker in one of those two scenarios, I'm out. It is what it is.
No, I love it, because I agree with those two statements. And, if you can't get out in front of who the ultimate decision maker is on a higher ticket volume sale, it's fine if they're lieutenants. That's how I usually refer to them, or, they're doing the vetting and making sure that we've got it to the table. But if we can't get an indicator that we're actually able to get a sit down or a phone call together with a decision maker just to air out what questions they might have for us. And that's how I usually pose it. Hey, great guys, looks like what you're on board what we have here, but I'm sure your decision maker's got some questions, and quite honestly, we don't want to move forward without understanding what the concerns are coming from there that may have not come down through you.
Yeah.
And if they're resistant at that stage, like completely resistant, it's telling me I'm being exercised, at least in my previous experiences.
Not only are you being exercised, but you're a commodity. Yep. And you're in for a world of hurt. And if you're the Walmart of this, of your territory, fantastic. You're set up well. But most of us aren't. We're the Nordstroms, right? Yeah. So we can't do that. We have to be able to demonstrate our value, and you have to be able to have a strong push-pull relationship there.
All right. So, to kind of wind this one down, the last thing I'll say too is, when you recognize that buyer is a buyer, it's not that you're going to call them out on them, but you got to have some back pocket tactic where you can say, look, if they don't subscribe to this, it's time to go. And that can sometimes help with the answer to your sales manager too, of why you gave up on that deal. We talked about it earlier about the fact that, a sales rep doesn't want to let go of that deal, but you got to understand if something that they told you was on a 1 to 3 month timeline is now gone into month 4, month 5, we're past that point of no return now. They're either kicking the tires and kicking the can down the road internally on their side, or on our side, we're just not reading the signals properly. I believe very much in the concept of the upfront contracts. When I finish anything with a team, we go over action items before I even leave that office space or leave that phone call. And then the final one is, when are you going to make firm commitment? And at some point in time in that sales cycle, and you'll recognize when it is, but when this thing starts going swirly, you got to say, hey, look, here's the reality, whether you're playing it from the deals on the table and at the end of the month, it's going to be off the table, or you're coming from a different slant, which is, hey, I just want to be done with this. So here's the deal. Once this is done, we're not going to move forward. We're going to move on.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. You just have to, and there's so many examples out there. If you have to look on the internet to find examples of how to have those, breakup conversations, there's plenty of them out there. We have them on our university. Brian, you have plenty of them. So there's multiple ways to say it, but you got to have a line, right? If you don't have a line, then there is no line, and you're just going to keep getting ghosted and tell your sales manager, yeah, it's not it's not this month, it's going to be next month, but they're going to do it. And they're like, no.
Well, with that being said, Rob, I'll have you take us home in a moment, but I think this conversation, is probably a bite-sized morsel of some other conversations that could be had.
Sure.
Whether we do them in another fireside chat or we let Timmy come into it in a round table, we'll see. I think there's, a lot more about the sales process and the sales to prospect relationship that we can cover and really help folks from the experience that we have had. I think all of us have won deals, lost deals, and I've certainly stayed in deals too long.
Yeah. It's something you learn over time. But, Brian, this has been a good one, man. I love it. And I love your fireplace, man. It looks fantastic over there. The columns and everything, man.
It's amazing how our cribs look so much alike,
It is.
We're sporting the blues today, and, good times.
Your chair is on the opposite side of my chair. Look at that.
I'm sure that's how we got our camera set up. But with that said, why don't you take us home?
Look, for anybody who's looking to get in touch with, either one of us to talk more about, this topic or, any of the other topics that we're bringing up, we will have our LinkedIn profiles with this podcast. And you can also get this episode on mspbusinessschool.com or anywhere else that you get your podcast, to include YouTube. Brian, thanks a lot. And as always, we appreciate you, sir. I love your insight.
Hey, man, same from you. And this is always fun when we get to do something like this on a low key thing, but I do appreciate you saying out there, listeners, we really do want to hear from you. If you've got questions, that's what we're here for. We are two guys that are born to serve. Timmy is exactly the same way. We want to know what's on your mind and want to help you out. And certainly if we can put together an episode that even supports it more, we want to do it for our listeners.
Let us know.